Hello and welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Thomas Porteous and you are watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the world. As Romania's annulled 2024 presidential election has set the stage for a rerun, boosting far-right leader George Simion. Amid growing distrust in institutions, his appeal reflects Europe's wider populist surge, fueled by anti-EU sentiment, migration fears and frustration with elites. Allegations of Russian interference add to the uncertainty, while Prime Minister Bolojan's pro-EU coalition faces fragile power-sharing promises, looming austerity and public anger that could strain Romania's democratic stability. To talk about this, joining us now is Alison Mutler, a British journalist who has reported from Romania for nearly 35 years. Former Associated Press Bureau Chief for 25 years and part of ITN's team during the 1989 revolution. She now directs Universal Net, offering deep insight into Romania's politics and society. Today she discusses Romania's annulled election, the rise of the far-right leader George Simion, and the growing institutional distrust. She also examines Russian influence, the fragility of Prime Minister Bolojan's pro-EU coalition, and the pressures of austerity and public unrest. Thank you very much for joining us, Alison. Let's dive straight into this. Romania's 2024 presidential election was annulled, forcing a rerun this year and giving momentum to far-right leader George Simion. Many analysts see this as a symptom of institutional distrust. From your perspective, what does this say about the state of Romanian democracy today?
Romanian democracy came under threat last year with the first round of presidential elections because a far-right candidate was artificially inflated and came first in the first round. He won the first round. And then the Constitutional Court stepped in and cancelled the elections, as you said, and ordered a rerun, which caused a lot of anger and confusion in Romanian society. Many of them weren't clear why the elections had been cancelled. But a rerun was ordered, and there were fresh elections, and the elections were run democratically, and there was a very clear winner. So while there has been criticism, including by the U.S. State Department recent report of the cancellation of the elections, the rerun actually strengthened democracy in that the elections were free and fair, and there was a clear winner. So Romanian democracy is not out of the woods. It's still under threat. There are still problems, as you said in your introduction, but it is strengthened after the May rerun of elections.
Yes, and we've seen populist movements from across Europe gain traction by tapping into anti-EU sentiment, fears about migration and frustration with elites. What are your thoughts on these themes, and what do you think is driving its popularity?
Well, historically, there has always been institutional distrust. I moved to Romania full-time after the revolution and was quite surprised at how little Romanians trusted the authorities, much less so than Britain, where I come from. That has grown over the years, particularly Romania has been a member of the EU for 15 years now. They've seen the benefits, and they've seen other movements in other countries, other populist movements, and they've aligned themselves to them. And a lot of the slogans that populists come with are exactly that. They're populist. We don't want migration. Well, let's look at migration. Romania, I did a story for Universal on this last week. Romania has 100,000 non-EU foreign workers. A lot of them work in hospitality, construction, or they're, delivery. They work in delivery. They deliver, restaurant orders. That's not a lot in a country of 19 million. Most of them, of course, are in urban centres, and they're filling in a labour shortage. But the populists are exploiting that. Don't accept food unless it's delivered by a Romanian. Well, a lot of Romanians don't want those jobs. So economic realities mean that Romania does need migrant workers to fill in jobs. Plus, Romania has itself a deficit because there's 5 million Romanians working abroad, mainly in Western Europe. but the populists have managed to tap into so migration is not an issue, say, as it is in the UK, but other things that the mainstream parties have tricked Romanians and treated them badly, that resonates. The idea that the EU is all about LGBT rights, or that the products that are sold in Romania are inferior to in Western Europe. Those do resonate with some Romanians. And populists generally, they try and tap into dissatisfactions. They say that Europe is too progressive, that we are a Christian Orthodox country, we should be aligned with countries like Russia, etc. So the messages that the populists come with are designed to amplify dissatisfaction. And I think they're probably quite cleverly constructed, these messages, because obviously they resonate with some people. Not a certain amount, I wouldn't say more than 40%, but they do resonate.
Alison, of course, Romania was never part of the Soviet Union. However, it was formerly part of the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War. Russian aggression, of course, remains rife in the Ukrainian war, and there are certain worries in Eastern Europe that there could be further aggression encroaching into that land if Donald Trump's actions aren't secure enough, if security guarantees aren't supplied. What's the feeling in Romania about the threat from the east that Moscow shows?
There is a historical fear of the Russians because of what happened in Romania after the Second World War, when the Russians, with the Allies, emerged victorious, and Romania was part of that, although they had been allied with the Nazis before that. So there is fear, there's historical fear of what the Russians can do. But the Russia is engaged in a hybrid war in Europe, and it's a long-term war, and they've been doing it for a long time. And so there's a lot of covert messaging. Read the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which does resonate with some Romanians, as I say. But there is, generally speaking, a fear. And I think opinion polls show that sort of pro-Russian camp is about 14-15%. So it's not significant, but I would imagine that Russia would seek to bolster that and will continue its hybrid war in Romania and other European countries.
Alison, some reports suggest that Russia has been quietly meddling in the elections through disinformation and support networks. How serious is the external influence factor in Romanian politics? I know you did briefly touch on it there, but do Romanians themselves see it as a real threat?
That's actually a very good question. Russia has been engaged in a hybrid war against Romania, trying to get Romanians to turn their back on on the EU, on NATO, on their Western alliances that Romania tried so very hard to join. I remember in 2004 when they joined NATO, they wanted to join earlier. When they joined EU, there was rejoicing. They were in the streets. But time has dulled those joys, and dissatisfaction has set in. No organization brings milk and honey. So Russian disinformation works through the Romanian churches, the Orthodox Church, because Romania is a Christian Orthodox country like Russia and also like Ukraine. They work through social media, very good on social media. That is how they amplified the campaign of the far-right candidate, Călin Georgescu. As I said, they have influencers. They work through the media. The next part of your question, how aware are Romanians? The answer would be Romanians were very unaware they would be a target. There's a certain amount of, I don't want to insult anyone, but a certain amount of provincialism in Romania. So when reports came out from Romania's intelligence services, obviously delivered by the president and other offices, that Russia had interfered, that was actually confirmed by the former president, Klaus Iohannis. Most people scoffed at that idea. This is nonsense. This is just rubbish. It must have been some internal thing. Old security guys want to control Romania, and they want the populists in power. as time has passed and more information has come out and there's been more disclosures, more people are educating themselves that Romania is a target of Russian disinformation. And not only that, it's not that the Russians tried to influence the elections and failed, and so they're going to give up. They won't give up. They will continue. They will continue. So I think Remain's becoming more aware of it. And what is helping us is current administration communicates a little bit more than the former administration, because Remainers were taken by shock when there was allegations of disinformation. I think a lot of them couldn't believe it. And Universal had been following Russian disinformation for several years, so we weren't surprised. We didn't necessarily understand all the mechanisms immediately, but we weren't surprised. But what surprised me was that even senior journalists, it took them a few months to actually realise that the allegations of Russian interference were fairly substantial.
Thank you very much for that insight, Alison. It's fascinating. Prime Minister Ili Bolojan's pro-EU coalition, it approved an unlikely mix of parties to stabilise Romania after months of some would call turmoil. How strong is this coalition in practice?
It's a delicate balancing act. As you say, there is a real mix of parties, and the main thing that holds them together is they are pro-European. They want Romania to remain on its pro-European or pro-Atlantic path. That's what they share in common. But we have the Social Democrats, we have the more progressive parties, and we have a centre-right party, and we have an ethnic Hungarian minority. That said, Romania is used to, it's not like the UK. Romania functions on coalition governments. I can't remember when we ever didn't have a coalition government, although I'm sure we probably didn't. In the early 90s, we didn't have a coalition government. But it does, Romania operates on coalition governments, which come with the problems they come with. But as you said, the Prime Minister has undertaken some fairly unpopular measures. Raising taxes, and so prices have raised. A lot of people say, why do we have to suffer this? Romania has a huge budget deficit. That's Romania's problem. It's like the highest in the EU. I think it's it was 9.3% last year. So spending needs to be under control for Romania as a member of the EU, and that means also Romania is a net recipient of EU funds, which means Romania gets more EU funds than it donates to the common pot. And to be able to access those funds and prove that it is, if you like, a responsible member of the EU, it has to get spending under control, and that's never going to be popular. So there are difficulties in the coalition. The Social Democrats obviously like to appeal more to the workers or the people who are perhaps in the villages and rural areas, or people who aren't as well paid. So, and they are the biggest party on paper, not on paper, in reality, in Parliament. But the size of that party, their imprint, their footprint on Romanian politics is shrinking. And there are a lot of calls. I don't want to get into too much internal politics, but there are calls for reform within the Social Democrats. So it is a delicate balancing act, and it will depend on the partners in the coalition and their maturity and what they want for Romania's future as well.
Alison, finally, the coalition government has pledged a, quote, rotation of power between parties in the coming years. Historically, such arrangements in Romania and outside have been fragile. What challenges do you foresee in making this power-sharing deal work?
Again, Romania's had it before. It has caused frictions because generally people don't like to leave high office. It's your time is up. You're no longer prime minister, and it's also who gets to be prime minister when there's elections. Because obviously, if you have the position of prime minister, when there are elections, you have an advantage because you organise the elections. So I do foresee frictions and problems within the coalition, which will also lead to public anger. There is anger already over rising prices, but if people see that the government isn't that efficient and they're just fighting amongst themselves, that will also dent the popularity of the government as well.
Alison Mutler, thank you very much for speaking to us on such a fascinating topic. And thank you for joining us here on Focal Length. It's been a pleasure. With that, it's a wrap on this episode. For more international news and updates, stay tuned here on NewsX World.